Soy Hector 3.
Hector 2.
Hector 1. Soy Hector 3.
Hector 2.
Hector 1. Soy Hector 3.
Hector 2.
Hector 1. Soy Hector 3.
Hello, buenos dias, and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, the podcast trapped in its own time loop right along with the movies we discuss. This season, we're discussing Triangle and Timecrimes. I'm your host, Bubbawheat, and in this episode, we are discussing the first loop in Timecrimes that starts at the beginning of the movie and ends at 23 minutes and 36 seconds, with Hector getting closed inside a mysterious vat of milky liquid to escape a bandaged lunatic. Joining me today is my guest Dave Forsythe from Edge of Tomorrow Minute, a fellow time looper. So how are you doing today?
Doing all right. It's as far as I know, my first time through today, so that's good, right?
Yeah, that's pretty good. And
yeah,
this is fun. This is the third section of the third season, where we are starting off with Timecrimes here. This is a 2007 Spanish language movie from the director Nacho Villagando. And, this was the first time watching it for me, literally just, a couple weeks before I started recording and getting everything set up. I knew the general structure, and I knew it was very similar to Time Loop and Triangle. But I didn't realize how similar it was to the structure of Time Loop until I actually watched it. So if you've listened to the Time Loop episodes, this movie has, an extremely similar structure to it, except it has a lot more of a thriller vibe than Time Loop's kind of light drama / light comedy. I had you on because you mentioned that you'd seen it before and you love this film. So let me ask you, how did you first discover this film, and what did you think about the movie?
Well, it wasn't that long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, that I first heard about it and saw it, and it was from our mutual friend Robert Black, Professor Black. He maintains a list of time loopy movies and TV shows and things like that, and
he's been a guest a couple of times already.
Yeah. So he's it used to be just a Word document that I think he passed around, but I think he's got it hanging out on IMDb now for public consumption. But when I told him I was doing Edge of Tomorrow and it was, I sort of thought about doing it for a long time before I actually started doing it, and was doing a lot of research, and I was ambitious at one point. I was like, maybe I'll do like a loop of the week kind of thing, and he's like, here, take this list, and I started watching a bunch of the ones on it, and this was when I actually had to hunt down. Like, at the time, it was not available. I think I had to actually like rent it on YouTube or something like that. It was not that renting it on YouTube is difficult, but it wasn't like available on Netflix or available on HBO Max like it is now. So it was. Yeah,
and like you said, I should mention for anybody that hasn't seen this and does want to watch it, at least at the time of recording, it is available to stream on HBO Max. Editor's note: it is no longer available on HBO Max.
Yeah, so I watched it. I would say it's probably, maybe 3 years ago now at this point. And, I'm a fan of all things sort of sci-fi, and I generally like foreign movies, and I generally like thrillery, slashery type movies, and this kind of has all of that in it. So it was good for me. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I like this film. It did surprise me in a few moments, especially because, partly because I was going in and expecting like a certain number of repetitions. And then whenever it ended, it was like almost an hour in, and it was only on the second repetition.
Yeah.
That threw me off just a little bit. But I did really like where this film ends up, and I won't spoil it too much, but it's not darker than Triangle. It's a lot darker than Time Loop.
Yeah.
I think it's on par with Triangle, and similarly, this film is pretty much following like the Hector movie. It follows Hector pretty much constantly from start to finish.
Can you imagine the chaos of this movie if there were a lot more loops, like if it ramped up at the end? It would just be anyway. You'll have to watch it to get that one, kids. But it would be strange for sure. So
yeah, and similar to the all the loops in this is what I call a recursive time loop, or it follows like a fatalistic philosophy where basically everything that happens across all three loops happens in all three loops.
Yeah.
Where we just only see a portion of it.
Yeah, and there's there's a mechanism, like a man-made mechanism that kind of throws it into the sci-fi realm of it. It's not some sort of force of nature that's making this happen. So I'm sure Robert has a term for what this type of loop is, but I always forget I know there's the Connors loop. That one's easy to remember, but then I think he's got some other terms for them, but I forget exactly what they are.
Yeah, I'm not sure myself either. Didn't want to do like a time loop of the week sort of thing, just because I don't watch as many movies, and so with this show, I've talked about it before, but I like my preference, instead of like watching all the time loop movies as quickly as possible, I'm just going through the selections that I choose for the seasons, and then I really dig into each one of them. So
yeah.
There's still a lot of time loop movies that I have not seen yet, other than some of the biggest ones.
Right.
So let's go ahead and get started into Timecrimes, and the film starts off with a bunch of foreign titles that I don't know, and then we get into this drive home from the I guess the grocery store, or like a big box store.
Yeah.
Which I don't think we see the name of it. I kind of saw the last four letters, but I think that was a store across the street and not the actual grocery store.
Well, and it, at one point when he gets home, we see some IKEA stuff in there. So I was kind of looking to see if there was an IKEA in there, because, I mean, if a movie's cursed if it starts with IKEA, because IKEA's cursed. But I think they were deliberate to not show like a specific, store or anything like that. But I mean, it does. Even the parking lot scenes are before he starts driving, it's got a pretty ominous soundtrack, and there's it's slow, deliberate movement, right? So it's got a very Carpenter-ish feel to it. To kind of it triggers some ominous things in my mind. It feels like it's setting a deliberately dark and eerie sort of mood for me early on.
Yeah, although it goes from the dark and eerie music straight into like silliness. It has this like slow or this quick pan across all these items strung on the driveway.
Yeah.
And then we see that they have actually, I guess, his trunk opened early, and they're all just falling out of the trunk.
Yeah.
And I think this is important because, especially this first loop, it really sets up Hector as what I call an incompetent schlub.
Yes, sure. I would agree with that. Yeah, like you said, the things falling out of the trunk, and then sort of his struggle to gather those things, and then he trying to get help from his wife, and he just she doesn't come.
He calls for his wife Clara.
Yeah. And it's sort of it does set him up as a can't get anything right kind of guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did try to make a list of all the things that I could see on the ground. So there's clearly the small table, which does play into the film throughout. It comes into play later. There's like a small bag of charcoal briquettes and a box of something that I couldn't determine. There's a package of grilling utensils, like a fork and a metal spatula.
Yeah.
Another large bag, which I'm pretty sure is fertilizer, since Clara
right.
mentions getting fertilizer. There's a spray bottle, which also it looks like weed killer or something similar. Another bag of charcoal, a plastic shopping bag with some forks, and a couple bottles that I think kind of look like laundry detergents, but they could also be plant related.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because like you said, the fertilizer and the plant related stuff. That's when we discover Clara. She's in the backyard doing some gardening, right? And so she's like planting some things in a planter, and she asks about the
fertilizer, if he got the fertilizer.
Yeah, right. So she's like, she sort of explains what she was doing, and it kind of sets a scene for the two of them. The stuff that he's buying is stuff that's like, it's not super clear indicators of like, we just moved into this house, but as you sort of watch it, watch this scene in the next minute or two unfold, it's clear that this is either a new house for them or like their vacation house or something that's not fully set up. And it's like a new place for them, like it's something's not entirely comfortable here yet,
Yeah. We're only like halfway through the stuff. There's a third bag of charcoal that I saw. And for a second I was questioning myself, maybe I'm misreading the bag, but even though it's kind of blurry, I could see like the picture, like it has like fire symbols.
Oh, sure.
And it has like a little image of like a charcoal grill, like with the 3 feet and kind of the roundish. Because there's also like a weed whacker or like a hedge trimmer. You can see that like after he turns around, there's like a big box, which again, whenever you see it from the other angle, the design, like the picture on the box kind of makes me think it might be a lawnmower. There's like a couple large cases, like one that's like a briefcase and another like a big plastic case, like it would be some other type of tool.
Sure. He's pretty lucky that waited until he got to their driveway to open up, and it didn't get all strewn down the Spanish countryside highways, right?
Yeah, and then the last thing that falls out as the camera shows the car is like a small like 3-step ladder wrapped in plastic. Yeah, and then he says that he's going to go upstairs and lie down, and again I think that further puts him into this like kind of schlub, this middle-aged man that he got so tired from going shopping that he has to take a nap.
Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure about that because it's pretty abrupt, right? Like he brings in like the couple of things that Clara had wanted. It doesn't seem like he's even dealt with everything that was out on the driveway yet. And then he just abruptly announces, I'm going to go lay down. And she seems like, okay, that's perfectly acceptable. So I wondered, is he medically okay? Like, did they move out to the country because he had a nervous breakdown or something like that? I just raised all sorts of questions about, is Hector okay? So it was an interesting little mood setting little moment for him.
Yeah, I just got the impression, he's a middle-aged guy. He's
Sure.
balding. He's got a bit of a pot belly. I just got the impression that, he's slightly older, like not old, but he's middle-aged. He's out of shape. And just going into town for a big shopping trip just wore him out.
Sure. And there's a line a little bit later on that sort of, I think he just mentions like, I don't want to use the car again. It's sort of, I think, maybe you're right. Those sorts of things just sort of wear on him, right?
Yeah. And then, he goes upstairs and changes because he went shopping in like a nice suit. Yeah.
Yeah. The sport coat at least. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he goes and tries to take a nap, and it cuts a couple times to show that he can't fall asleep.
Yeah.
And so he goes and grabs his binoculars and goes to look at the surroundings.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sets him up as this voyeur character, right? Like he can't sleep, so what's he do? He opens the window and looks out, and then they show the room that he's in, and he just his, looking with his eyeballs isn't quite good enough for him. So he immediately, amongst all these unopened packing boxes, he's able to locate his binoculars. So clearly, that's an important item to him. He had to unpack that early. He knew where it was, and he goes and grabs them. So I get the feeling that this is, and this will pay out later, right? That this is something that he does. He's used to being around, looking out at stuff. He's always sort of surveilling whatever his intention is. Like maybe he's a bird watcher, maybe he's just trying to figure out his new surroundings. But he has this sort of voyeuristic intent set up for him early, I think.
Yeah, and we do get that shot of his room, and all the windows are covered in plastic, and like the light fixture is just a bare light bulb. It's not even a light fixture.
Do you think that those windows are covered because they're painting? Or
yeah, there's a line.
Okay.
She asked to, like whenever we get to the phone call, Clara asks if the painter's called.
Ah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, after he looks out, calls down to Clara, and yeah, he's like looking out the window with his binoculars, and the phone rings. And instead of going to answer the phone himself, he yells out the window and asks Clara to come inside and answer the phone.
Yeah. It goes about as well as his trying to get help when he first pulls up to the house, right? Like, she doesn't hear him, and so he ends up having to do all this himself. So it's another sort of ineffective Hector moment.
Mm-hmm. And this is also the first like time loop marker, because we don't know it yet, but on the other end of the phone is Hector 2 calling him.
Yeah.
And again, I think this shows another side of, Hector's incompetent schlubbiness, because, he calls back and gets the message, and then Clara comes in and startles him, so he drops the phone underneath the couch.
Yeah. He drops the phone under the couch, and it like kind of loses it, and Clara comes in. I forget, she's carrying a thing, like something, and
like her gardening supplies. There's like
her
her watering can.
Yeah, and so he's trying to move the couch to locate this phone, and they carry on their conversation, and it starts getting a little steamy, right? Like but about halfway through that, they realize
like very PG steamy.
Yeah,
right. The most she does is she like pulls up his shirt and starts kissing towards his nipple.
Yeah. But part of the way through that, they realize that the phone is still connected. So maybe I should backtrack that a minute, because he answered the phone and he didn't hear anybody on the other end of the line, but he knows that nobody has their phone number. So when he hung it up and did like *69 or something like that to call right back the person who called him, and it connects to an answering machine. So when he drops the phone, he is connected to somebody else's answering machine. He doesn't know who it is at this point. He hasn't spoken to anybody.
And it says that it's like a restricted line. So please either dial the extension of who you're calling or leave a message.
Right. So, while they're having this little flirty interaction on the couch, it's recording that into the phone, which I'm going to call this voyeur moment too, because, I don't know how spoilery we want to get on this, but it's, impossible with time loop moments. But like the person who eventually listens to them conversing and having a little flirty moment is himself, right? Like, so he's essentially being a voyeur to his own life at some point, which is kind of an interesting thing given, all of what's going to go on here. So.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting that Clara mentions that she's surprised that today is Saturday, because, she's like, maybe it was a worker, and he mentions that it's Saturday.
Oh, yeah, right.
And she's like, is it really Saturday? So how long do you think they've been working on this house for her to lose track of what day it is?
A good question. Usually I think it's had to be at least a couple weeks of time out of regular work schedule before I totally lose track of what day it is. So I would assume it's probably been similar for her. So maybe they've been there like a week or two or I mean, it's really hard to tell exactly what's going on here with them. Like, it almost feels like this is their retirement home, although they're maybe a little young for that. So, but like they've moved out to the country. This is their sort of Green Acres moment, right? Like,
Yeah, we never really get any indication, at least I don't believe so, of what like Hector does for a living. So like how, if they're well off or if they're middle class. I mean, my guess would be just the way they look would be an upper middle class.
Yeah, and it's a pretty big house that they've got. So, I would assume that's sort of a resorty, maybe even second home for them, So I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. I think she has one of the weakest arguments I've ever heard is when she says, basically, why even have a phone if nobody has their phone number?
It's like, so you can call other people, Clara. That's what that's for. So.
And not only that, but nobody has their phone number yet.
Right.
Because they just moved in.
They just moved in, yep.
And she starts kissing him after saying that he's too weak to argue and he still looks tired and didn't get any sleep. And he's like, yeah, I slept.
Yeah. Not really, Hector. Come on. You can't fool your wife.
And then, after he grabs the phone and sees that it's still recording and hangs it up, then we have a good, almost 5 seconds shot of just the phone sitting on the charger with the two of them off screen, still making like the kissing noises, and then it jump cuts. So I think it's pretty. I don't think it's a big leap to think that they just had sex there.
Sure, yeah, I could see that.
He's tired, but not too tired for sex.
Right, and after the end of that cut, I think he's actually wearing different clothes. So I would maybe because I think he's just wearing like a t-shirt when he answers the phone. And
he was wearing a gray shirt and his boxers, and then then they're outside and he's wearing like a beige long sleeve shirt and slacks. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think that's probably a good assessment there. I was thinking maybe they were putting a little too much emphasis on the phone for Chekhov's cordless telephone, but I think maybe you're right. I think they were maybe making a sexy time implication. So.
Yeah, and then it cuts to Clara putting that small table together outside. And I think the interaction between Clara and Hector is kind of weird, but kind of interesting because they have like a brief but a very cordial argument of whether or not this table will fit through the bedroom door or if it'll fit inside the bedroom.
Yeah, it's sort of a I told you so kind of moment, only in advance,
Yeah. And also, what they're doing for dinner. And like you said, Hector's like, well, I don't want to go out and drive again, but we don't have anything in the fridge.
Right. Yeah, and it sort of shows how, how much this house is not their home fully yet, right? Because they're still dependent on going into town for everything. He just came from town. But yet, in order to just even feed themselves, they've got to go back to town. So it's, setting that up. But what's the argument they make that if the table will fit
Clara says that, if the table won't fit, then she'll go get food for dinner.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't fit, then it'll look just as nice outside. She mentions that too.
Right.
And, through this whole argument, which it's I barely even want to call it an argument because it's so conversational. It's not. They have a weird relationship because they're not like clearly loving toward each other, but they're not like antagonistic either.
Yeah. It's just sort of a witty repartee kind of thing going on there, where they just sort of antagonizing each other just for conversational fun, right? So
but it's I don't know, maybe it's partly because it's in Spanish, but it feels very flat to me. Like it doesn't it doesn't feel like they're having fun. It just feels very matter of fact.
There's almost a little bit of bargaining going on there too, right? Because I don't think either of them wants to get in the car and go drive to get food. So they're finding this thing that they're disagreeing about to sort of make some leverage on each other. So, there may be, like you said, I don't think there's animosity or anything like that going on, but it's nobody's willing to sort of give in on this point because they've got something they want, right?
Yeah, like the most heated that it gets is, during this whole conversation, he's sitting in the yard chair looking out with his binoculars, and he sees a patch of color, and then Clara steps in front of him, and
Right.
and he says, move, move, move. But he says it about the level of move, 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 like right about that level of intensity. So it's more intense than the rest of this conversation, but it's not like angry.
Well, and this is sort of voyeurism marker number 3 for me, because he, when he comes out into the yard and he sits down in the chair with his binoculars and he starts scanning the woods, right? So he could still be bird watching, he could still be whatever. It's not clear what he's doing, but it's a very normal thing. She's not like, what are you doing with those binoculars? It seems like this is a thing that he does, right? Like he comes out.
Yeah, she treats it very normal. And in fact, like whenever he says that he sees something, Clara grabs the binoculars and says, where is it? And then she looks for it. And I think it's interesting, we never get a Clara POV shot through the binoculars. We just see her looking at the binoculars from the third person. We only see the POV whenever Hector's looking through the binoculars.
Yeah, true. And, it doesn't seem like if you've ever tried to see a thing through the binoculars that someone else has seen through the binoculars, finding the same spot again can be difficult. And he's like, there's a clearing to the left or whatever. And it's like, she's never going to see it.
Yeah,
so.
And then he's just, just give it back to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get the POV shot with the binoculars again. And he sees this woman standing still with her hair in front of her face and like head turned to the side so we can't see her face. Yeah. She's wearing a white t-shirt with 2 cats and red pants. And we don't get a real good shot of the t-shirt, so I will discuss the meaning of that shirt in a later episode.
Sure. Yeah. She's doing what I like to call a Blair Witch sort of pose, right? Like just kind of standing there, head down, arms straight down, very still. It's almost kind of an eerie thing to be doing, right?
Yeah, and she bites her thumb and then takes her shirt off, and she's not wearing a bra.
Right.
So, we get a boob shot, and the thing that I think is interesting is that the sound actually completely drops out while we're seeing this kind of eerie, voyeuristic, slightly sexy, but still it has a very wrong vibe to it, especially with like no sound. And then the sound isn't broken until we hear Clara say, "You win." And then after she says that, the camera cuts back to Hector. And as soon as the camera cuts, then we get all the background noise, like the bird sounds come right back.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't even notice that it dropped out like that. But yeah, I can see how that would be an effective, right? Like if you're scanning the woods, you see a little pop of like red in the woods. And so you're like, what the heck was that? And then you look away and then you come back to it. And suddenly it turns out it's this attractive lady. And then suddenly this attractive lady has her shirt off. And you're like, I could see how that might steal your focus a little bit, right? Like it might tune out some of the other things that are going on in your world at that moment.
Yeah, I think it does a good job of putting us inside Hector's head at that moment where he's like singularly focused on this woman.
Yeah. And I've been dropping these sort of voyeur hints in it, but I mean, I think anybody who just happened to be in their backyard with binoculars and if you saw a person where you didn't intend to see a person and then suddenly that person is getting naked, you'd be like, whoa, what's going on here? It's a thing that would attract attention for sure.
And then Clara says that she would rather lose the bet than have Hector against her.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because I think that line stood out to me as odd, and I'm not sure if it was a problem with the translation or if there's actually something more to this line, because it to me, the way she said, or not the way she says it, because again, it's still very matter-of-factly, like she doesn't say it any differently than the rest of this conversation that they've been having, but just her saying, I would rather lose the bet than have you against me, almost has this subtext that hints at something sinister about Hector. Like if possibly there's some abuse in the relationship, or maybe, he is a darker character that we don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of got the sense that she didn't even try to move the table inside yet, right? Like she's just sort of given up. Like she's saying, like, fine, I'll go. I don't want to put this stress on you. It's more important for me to keep you calm and happy than it is to win the argument, right? So I do think there is something, whether it is like you're surmising something that is, she's trying to avoid repercussions on her, or if she's trying to, try and make his evening better, and notices that he's been stressed out already, something like that. Like there is something that she's trying to avoid by giving in here, right?
Yeah, it does stand out because there's not really any other signs that they're in an abusive relationship, because all their other interactions seem perfectly normal. Like she doesn't seem, there doesn't seem to be any tension between them.
Yeah, and Hector is so ineffective anyway. I don't imagine, he does much more than like pout and be maybe verbally, abusive at worst, I would think. But I don't know. It's yeah.
And I think I do like your theory that she didn't even really try. She just like took it upstairs and then just made the decision. I'll just go to get the food anyways. I'll make it easy on him, so I'll just bring the table back down, because we do end up seeing the table again later in the movie inside the house. And also just looking at it, it's a very simple table, and it looks like even if it maybe couldn't fit through the door like a certain way, it has enough spaces between it that you should be able to maneuver it inside the door.
Yeah, or if you needed to take a leg off to get it through, it would be a pretty simple process. So
I think the other thing that goes along with his voyeur nature that I think is interesting is, she decides to go take the car, and, he's slightly distracted, and she has to kind of press him a couple times to get the keys from him. And he's like, the keys. But then he just waits, they give each other a kiss, and then he waits for her to pull out of the driveway before he brings out the binoculars again to look for the woman.
Well, and you notice he didn't say anything about it to her. He didn't say like, hey, there's a person out there, or, anything like that. So it's like a thing that he's discovered that he is keeping to himself, discovers, his wife comes upon him while he's looking at it, and he stops, right? Like he's like, oh, I'm not doing anything. And then once she leaves, he's like, moves his chair to get a better position to look better, and then he's right back at it. So
yeah, because he goes to look again, and he sees her pants on the ground, but he only just barely sees it, and then he has to move the chair to get a better look. Yeah,
so it indicates to me that he's not, right? Like at this point you might have questions, what is Hector thinking? Is he thinking what's going on out there? Is he thinking, who is that? Is this person trespassing? But this little bit of interaction with him sort of looking guilty about it, maybe, ashamed-ish, makes it feel a little more perverted, a little creepier.
Yeah, but I also noticed that there's not like a level of urgency either. Like he does wait for her to pull out before he looks again for the binoculars, but it's not like the binoculars snap up to his eyes. He just kind of casually puts the binoculars up to his eyes in order to look for her again.
Yeah, right. It's not like a scene from Porky's or Meatballs or something like that where he's like, whoa, it's not that sort of salacious. Mm-hmm. It's just a curious older guy from a distance kind of perversion, not the
but then
sex romp comedy kind of thing. So
yeah, but since he can't actually see her anymore, he does take it a step further and decides to go investigate, and goes off to the side and walks to the road, and then we see another time loop marker, which at this point we don't know is a time loop marker yet. We see the knocked over trash bin with trash on the floor or on the ground along the road, and her bike, which we don't know it's her bike yet.
Yeah, it's sort of like a small covered dumpster kind of thing, like a communal trash bin kind of thing, not like a...
But it's very small, so
trash.
it's like it would be like maybe for a small business or for like just maybe a 2 or 3 family household.
Right.
And again, he's using the binoculars, and once again we get this sound, although it doesn't completely drop out this time, because there are a couple moments where you can kind of hear some like nature chattering, but it does mostly drop out whenever he's looking through the binoculars, and then the sound comes back up whenever he's not looking through them.
Do you think that the trash bin and the bike spotted along the road kind of maybe shifts the intent for Hector a little bit, right? Like we see him looking through his binoculars, looking for this naked woman, and it, like I said, it maybe heightens the Hector's a pervert kind of feeling that you have. But then when he sees the bike and the trash bin knock over, I think that maybe like pushes him back into like he's a concerned citizen Hector kind of thing, right? Like he's like, what exactly is going on over here? Kind of, less like he's running into the woods looking for a naked lady. Now he's running into the woods looking to figure out what exactly is going on, kind of thing.
I didn't get that vibe, but I think that is a very good read. I just, whenever I watched it, I just thought that he looked at that and it was just like, oh, that's strange. Now where's the naked lady? But yeah, I do think that is strange enough to where it does shift to a mixture of voyeurism and concern after he goes and looks again, and especially like he sees the feet first.
Yeah.
And again we get this bumbling incompetent schlub where he's looking through the binoculars and he like trips and falls down.
Yeah, it's almost like he's leaning on a branch and that branch snaps, right? So it's like a very like, I don't know, it feels like a very tropey move, like where you would see that kid trying to like peer in on a baseball game through the hole in the fence, and then the slab that he's leaning against flops in or something like that. It has a very, it's almost kind of comedic, I think, but yeah.
And again, he has this interaction because he sees the woman that's had taken off her shirt, and now she's like unconscious, laying on the ground next to a rock, completely naked now.
Yeah.
And but I think I think it's pretty clear that you can see her breathing.
Yeah, I think that's a deliberate thing. It's not like they were trying to show her as being dead, but the actress was still breathing. I think it's, they sort of pan down on her from head down through her chest, and as you get halfway down her chest, I think she's very demonstrably breathing, right? So like maybe she's not okay, but she's still alive.
Yeah, and then he's too afraid to go up to her, so he throws a stick, and the first stick like only makes it like halfway.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the next one makes it to her hand, and then as soon as it drops, he like backs up a couple steps too, like he's afraid that she's going to, I don't know, wake up and just go after him. Sure, yeah.
He's suddenly gotten the sense that he's being creepy, right? Like, there's a naked lady sleeping in the woods, and I've been spying on her. Now I've made enough ruckus that she knows I'm here, and so he doesn't want to be, caught being the peeping Tom, peeping Hector.
And then he finally gets the courage, because she doesn't react at all, that he goes up closer to her. And then again we get the sound design where you can clearly hear the sound of her breathing. Yeah. They really dial that up to where we get one good breathe in and breathe out before he gets the scissors in his arm from Hector too. Yeah, and then
very sudden scissors to the arm.
Yeah, and then that combined with the introduction of the score, we get the very, the violins, the very intense strings music.
Yeah. And you like you said, you get the very sudden scissors to the arm, and we've identified it here as Hector too, but like you don't even get a view of who it is. You basically just see the arms or the hand with the scissors reach around, stab, and then sort of a dark blur. You don't get any clues at this point as to what exactly has happened to Hector 1, I guess.
Yeah, and then Hector 1 runs off and hides behind a tree, and he looks through his binoculars, and he sees just like a pink flash go by the first time, and then it's not until the second time that he gets the view, starting with the scissors and moving up to the trench coat, and then we see the pink bandages. And I will say that this is something that I have a hard time taking seriously after watching the rest of the movie, knowing that this is the third time that he makes this gesture where he does, the Hector 2 and the pink bandages wrapped around his head like the Invisible Man. He turns around all of a sudden, looks directly at Hector 1, and makes like the hand binoculars.
Yeah, he's doing like a mocking gesture, looking back at Hector 2's doing a mocking gesture, looking back at Hector 1 with his binoculars, sort of mimicking his same.
Yeah, but it's hard to take it seriously because in the next loop you see that that was his third attempt because he wasn't sure exactly where Hector 1 was.
Yeah, the whole thing is ridiculous. Like the getup that he's wearing is, like you said, it is very, very Invisible Man-ish. It's very like, if you've watched a lot of like 70s Italian giallo movies, there's always a sort of like Dr. Frankenstein, or not Dr. Frankenstein, that's an actual thing. There's like, it's like there's always like a doctor or something like Dr. Death or something that is coming to get the people in the small town that kind of looks like this in a, like an oversized overcoat and something on its head and sunglasses or something usually. And what they call the giallo suit. It's got a very, B-movie kind of look going to it.
Yeah.
And,
but the fact that it's bloody bandages, but it's like watered down blood. So it's not like the bright red that you would normally associate with like bloody bandages, but it's like a washed out pink.
Yeah, it's like it had been soaking in strawberry quick or something like that. Did they even make that anymore? Does anyone get that reference? I don't know. But.
And then again, we get another shot of incompetent Hector as he tries to climb the fence, and then it breaks and falls down and makes him fall down the hill, or not the hill, but just a slight slope.
It seems weird. Like if he were being, it's hard to really sort of get your bearings in these woods as to where they are. It feels like he should be trying to run back towards his house, but maybe Pink Bandage guy is between him and the path to his house. I don't really know, but it seems like if I were running through the woods and my house was just across the street, I wouldn't be trying to scale the barbed wire fence to try and get somewhere else. I would be trying to find an easier path back to my house. But
and again, we don't really have this sense of urgency either.
Yeah, that's true.
He falls down and then he just casually walks away.
Yeah.
And finds this, what looks like an abandoned building, because it is pretty much abandoned. It's an office building, but it's Saturday.
Right.
So there's nobody there. And he knocks a couple times, but we do hear like loud music coming from inside.
Very loud, yeah.
And so he just does the obvious thing and takes a large rock and breaks one of the giant windows.
And I don't know if you've ever tried to break a window into a office building or a residence like that. Like, I think you'd need a bigger rock and you'd have to throw it harder in order to get that to break. Pretty sure that was a movie window, but.
Yeah, I've seen one of those CCTV footage of criminals. There's one where a criminal throws a brick at a window very similar to that, and then it bounces off and hits him in the head.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things that you watch it and you're like, okay, thanks, movie window.
And then he goes inside, and it looks like a typical tech office break room. It's got a couple microwaves, some tables and chairs.
Yeah.
Looks like there's a small espresso machine.
Yeah. When he first falls at the fence line, there's no real sense of urgency, but it feels like once he gets inside the building, he was pretty tense at the door of the building, like yelling a couple times and desperate enough to pick up a rock and throw it at the window instead of going around to the other side looking for an open door. But as soon as he gets inside, it feels like the tension ratchets down even more, right? Like there doesn't feel like there's any evidence that he's being pursued or anything like that. It's a weird dynamic that's going on here.
Yeah, and then he sees this calendar on the wall that's been flipped over, and it has the time loop diagram, which this is much simpler than the one featured in the last movie, Time Loop, because that one had all the different repetitions, and this one is just like basically a Z with two X's.
When I think the first time I saw this through, I almost had a feeling like that was a diagram for him, right? Like this is you, this X. This is the other guy that's chasing you, X. So you should go this way through the building, kind of thing. But I mean, it turns out that's not what it is at all. But like, sort of it is, right? but it wasn't even. It's not. It's so generic. It's not clear that it's any sort of diagram for any. You can't discern what it is just from looking at it. So.
Yeah, it's not labeled at all. It's just basically a Z with an arrow on the front, and then the two X's at the two different corners, which basically represents Hector 1 and Hector 2, but we won't know that until the next loop. And we do see that it is September right now in the world of the movie, and it's a very generic calendar that just has like a picture of a hedge on it.
Yeah, it's the 12 hedges of southern Spain. 12 famous hedges. Yeah,
and he starts exploring this facility again very slowly and casually, and gets to this like medical room with a first aid kit mounted on the wall.
Yeah,
with the very clear like the first aid cross.
Yeah. Did you see some of it looks like there's like an X-ray of an iguana.
Yeah, it's like it looks like it's supposed to be an X-ray of a lizard.
Yeah,
but but it's so washed out you don't actually see any bones. It just looks like a reverse silhouette.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting.
And we got some white bins, a big metal container, a hook with a lab coat, and a couple safety goggles, and sinks and other various containers.
Yeah, generic lab.
Yeah. And we get to see the fake wound, which looks, I think, much worse than it would have. It's a very round and jagged, even though it looked like the scissors kind of went straight into his arm.
This almost looks like it went straight into his bone and like shattered off pieces of it, right? There's like sharp chunks of it. It's pretty gross.
Yeah. And the blood, I noticed that whenever he pulls up his sleeve, the blood doesn't come from the wound. It comes from above the wound. Like it comes from higher up in his sweater.
Yeah.
And then he cleans up his wound, and we don't actually see him clean up his wound. We just see him roll up his sleeve, and then it cuts to him with the bandage around his arm.
Right.
And he goes in the next room, and we see the computer screen that beeps from 75% up to 80%. And it does have a few interesting things on here. We see that this is Morgan's Engineering Laboratories, and it's labeled as Time and Machine Configuration Interface, version 0.8 L127 Beta. And it has various other numbers and buttons that don't really seem to mean anything important, or at least not anything that's meant to be figured out. It's just technobabble. But I think the most interesting and kind of fun thing is in the bottom right, it says, "Caution, please pay for your software."
Oh, that's funny. I didn't notice that.
So I think that's kind of ridiculous. It's a funny gag if you happen to catch it, but at the same time, it doesn't really make sense, because where would they find time machine configuration software that wasn't specifically created for them or by them, to where they would have to get the unlicensed version of the software?
That is pretty funny. Yeah, or like if you fire up the time machine configurator, you've got to wait 7 seconds.
Yeah, you have to wait 30 seconds before you can open it, because you have to watch the ad for, please purchase the full version. And after that, we get the introduction of the walkie-talkie, and we get what we eventually find out is basically a game between the tech and Hector. Because this is all just a ploy by the tech, because he's been told by Hector 2 to convince Hector 1 to get into the tank.
Right. I mean, there's a couple points throughout the movie where you feel like you are getting, I think in the credits he's just called the boy or the man or something like that, right? But call him the technician. But there's a few points where you feel like you're getting the real impression of the technician of the situation that's going on. But already in this point, when we're getting our first introduction to him, it's later revealed that this is all arranged, right? He's got an agenda already at this point.
He's playing along at this point, but we don't know that.
Right.
The first time watching this, it makes it seem like the bandaged invisible man is on his way, and he's actively chasing Hector. And, the tech creates this story about the fact that he has these security cameras, and he's basically he's watching a wall of monitors. And so he's given the play-by-play in order to push Hector basically to him. Mm-hmm. So he's luring Hector to him and to the time machine via this threat, that exists, but it's not an immediate threat to him right now. But he doesn't know that. But
this is just sort of coming to me now. There aren't any cameras, right? He's not actually looking. Okay. Yeah. For some reason, I knew he was, after the first time seeing this through, I knew he was misleading him, but I thought maybe there really was some cameras, but no, there's nothing. He's just, it's all lies.
Yeah. And I do also like this, this other display on the wall, the diagram of the facility that has this. It's this kind of old school with you almost expect it to be little screw-in light bulbs. The tiny little LEDs with this hill and the silo at the top, and it has the diagram for all the path lights.
Yeah, right.
Which I don't understand what the point of that is, in an actual, what they would actually use that for, because it has all these lines, but it seems to just connect to these solar lights, these pathway lights that you would just buy at Home Depot.
Yeah, it is a strange thing. I could see maybe a map of this building that he's in right now, but yeah, the rest of the campus does not seem like it needs to be mapped out anywhere with an elaborate mural or anything like that. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, and then right at the beginning of this whole conversation, we get I think what's the last marker. We get this peal of thunder off in the distance, which, as far as I can tell, I think the only filmmaking purpose for the thunder is just this extra sense of ominousness.
Yeah, I wasn't even 100% sure that it actually was thunder. And I was trying, as I was watching it again to prepare for recording, I was trying to think, was there something else that happened that would have made this sort of thunderous thing? Was this the activation of the machine again? Was Hector 3 going through right now? like right before this. I couldn't really piece it all together, but yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's just thunder because I think it does rain towards the end of the second loop.
Yeah.
And then he has a line towards the end of the third loop whenever he tells Clara that we have a while before it starts raining.
Oh yeah, right. Okay, so it is really just rain. Okay.
Yeah. And again, we have this, this zero sense of urgency that as Hector is being led to the silo with the threat of this masked man chasing him, but he's still casually walking up until the tech finally is like, he's taking out the cameras. And that finally gets Hector to start running. And then again, he trips and falls. And then that's whenever he freaks out and he's like, shut off the lights.
Yeah, it's very strange. It was another like indication that maybe there was something medically wrong with Hector. Like he was worn out from his time just running errands, so he had to go lay down. And here, when he trips, he almost seems like he's too exhausted to get up and move on. Right? Like he's. It just was weird to just weird decisions. I don't know if they're trying to actually indicate that there's something actually wrong with him or not, but it just sort of it was very strange. Yeah.
Yeah, and he finally makes it to the silo. He hears the car in the distance, and the tech says that it's the masked man. Which, do you think that the tech can actually see the person in the car from his vantage point, or do you think he's just, again, continuing this story to make him get in the tank?
I would think that he was just continuing the story, but like in a few seconds we're going to get, a brief flash of both the car and the masked man. And so I don't know. It doesn't seem like he'd be able to see that from where he is, but maybe he can.
Yeah, and it is also worth mentioning that the tech is played by the director.
Ah, okay. I didn't realize that.
Fairly certain. Hopefully I'm not wrong. Otherwise I will edit this out. If I'm right, I will leave it in. But yeah, the tech is played by the director, Nacho Villagando. And I don't have his filmography pulled up right now, but I think the film that most people might know him from is he later on went to direct the movie Colossal, the one with Anne Hathaway and unknowingly controlling a kaiju in Japan whenever she gets drunk and goes into this park. Which I haven't seen it. I've wanted to. I heard it's good.
Yeah, I only know it by name. I don't think I've seen it either.
The rest of this loop is the tech convincing Hector to get in this time machine or get in this vat. Through his urging, he's like, get in there and hide, and then this masked man won't see you.
Yeah, it's like, get in there, hide. I'll clamp the lid down, and it's a big round vat, right? Like the size of maybe a hot tub kind of thing, like a 2 or 3 person hot tub.
I think it's a bit like a 6-person hot tub. It's okay. I think it's pretty good size.
Yeah, but it's full of a light white milky kind of liquid, and the top on it it's connected to like a big arm, and it's a like clamped down and sealed kind of like it's almost like a vent, like you'd cover this thing if it was full of noxious fumes that you didn't want to get into the rest of the lab. You had to vent it out. It does not look like the kind of thing that I would ever get into, no matter what sort of, bandito was chasing me, especially if the guy telling you to get into it was wearing shoulder length thick rubber gloves, meant for caustic materials or whatever. So no.
And Hector is very hesitant, and he's like, well, can't you just lock the door? Can't we go anywhere else? And the tech is very insistent and, keeps making up reasons for Hector to get in this vat, saying, yeah, it's safe. I can't get in there with you because I have to control it from out here, but don't worry, I will start lowering it and then I will get in there with you. And then finally we see, bandaged Hector pop up in the window, and that's the final catalyst to get Hector 1 to finally jump into the tank. And then the tech starts lowering the hatch, and Hector's like, okay, you can come in, and then he just completely ignores him, doesn't even turn around.
Yeah, and he's like gesturing an arm out, and at some point he realizes this isn't what we talked about, and he's sort of leaning part of the way out, trying to get out, but he realizes that the lid is too low already. He can't get out, and then he's stuck, right?
Yeah, which, me watching this, you don't really kind of clearly see like what the level of the water is, and also like the vent seems like it's kind of concave.
Yeah.
So it seemed to me it looked like there would have been plenty of space for him to keep his head at the top and not be fully inside in the liquid. But as soon as the lid closes all the way down, he does go all the way into the liquid, and then he like pushes his face up against the side of the glass side of the tank so we can kind of see him, and then we get this bright white flash, and that's the end of this loop.
There you go. It's just that easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very convoluted. Like, if you didn't know this was a time loopy movie, you'd watch this and be like, why is everyone acting like this? It's a very strange, I don't know.
And I'll get into this more in the later loops, but the thing that I find interesting but also kind of weird about this is that the things that Hector does in the later loops are not something that a normal person would do. And
right.
Then he's only doing this because it's what already happened.
Yeah, and that brings up, and I'm sure you'll talk about this more as you go on, but it brings up a lot of questions about sort of predetermination, right? Like, is the universe just willing these things to happen, or are later versions of Hector doing these things because they know if they don't do those things, then things aren't going to fall into place the way they want them? Like, is he manipulating the situation, or is the universe manipulating him to make the situation happen?
Basically the decisions that he makes after this, he's not really making the decisions. And the way that I described it in the earlier two movies that I talked about in Triangle and Time Loop, is that the second and third Hectors don't really have any free will, because they're just carrying out actions that have already happened.
And when the first Hector is being manipulated by the second and third one, so he doesn't really have any free will either, right? So like,
yeah,
it's all a big loop. Isn't that weird how that happened? So.
Yeah, I believe it's. I should have looked it up beforehand, but I believe it's referred to as like a bootstrap paradox.
Sure, yeah.
Where that's something is happening because it already happened.
Right.
And because it's going to happen all at the same time.
And it's not Back to the Future where Marty can choose whether or not to kiss his mom, or these, like, if Hector kissed his mom, Hector's always going to kiss his mom. So it's
this isn't like diverging timelines. This is like the one singular timeline, and everything that's going to happen has already happened.
Yeah.
And I do like that as a concept, because it's interesting to play with and to see it be played with.
It's like a sci-fying of the Rashomon effect of things, where you're telling
three different stories from three different perspectives, but all three of those perspectives are the same person.
They're all Hector, yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Each one reveals a little bit of different motivation for the same sets of circumstances. So it's fun. It's a fun watch for sure.
Yeah, and by the end of the movie, he is a very different character from where he starts.
Oh yeah, Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it in that way it's almost like Edge of Tomorrow, where you've got your bumbling, can't do anything right kind of guy, but at the end he's a little more self-confident and he's at least worked his way through this specific situation kind of thing. So
yeah, he's basically not the hero of Verdun, but he's the next hero of Verdun.
He's the next hero of the vacation house, at
least. So is there anything else that you want to talk about this first loop?
I have to say that this first loop feels very like I said, if you don't know that this is a loop movie, although it's called Timecrimes, so I don't know why you wouldn't know that. It feels very slasher fic to me, right? Like it's it's got a guy alone in the woods does something kind of sexually charged and then gets stabbed by some unspeaking masked person with an exotic sharp instrument, right? And then he flees in sort of the dumbest manner possible and makes a bunch of bad decisions along the way, and then it sort of ends, and like it ceases to become a slasher flick at that point. But yeah, it's got all those things. I think there's some serious homage in there to the slasher flick just in this first section anyway. So
yeah, I think especially with that and with this Hector too as this masked figure, this invisible man, but there is also that level of humor and quirkiness with the pink bandages and these scissors as a weapon, which is not what most people would consider a deadly weapon.
Yeah, it's well, and the one strike to the arm is not a killing blow by any means, but I mean, obviously he can't. You could ask of Hector too, like, why wouldn't you just kill Hector 1 to solve your problems? But like, you can't take that risk to kill yourself in any loop at any point, because you don't know what precipitates your survival, right? So and killing any version of yourself to try and end the loop is, unless that sounds like madness to me. But yeah,
well, I think that about covers this first loop here, and I don't think I mentioned it on this episode, but there will be 4 episodes of Timecrimes. There are technically only 3 loops, but the second loop will be split into 2 parts. But I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and go ahead and take a moment to plug your presence online and your podcasts and anything else that you want to plug.
Yeah, Edge of Tomorrow Minute is the show we do. It's myself and my cousin Todd, and we do go through Edge of Tomorrow in the movies by minutes format. So we do 1 minute of screen time per episode of podcast. I think that's the first time I've ever gotten that right on the first try. But yeah, we cover the 2014 Tom Cruise, Emily Blunt, Doug Liman directed movie where it's sort of a D-Day invasion against aliens with a time loop, and it's actiony. It's kind of funny depending on how you feel about killing Tom Cruise. And it's a generally all around good romp that I think. I mean, I don't know how well known it is these days. It sort of, when we were talking about doing it, it felt like a very sort of underappreciated movie because it had weird identity issues, right? Like if you saw it in the theaters, it was called Edge of Tomorrow. If you rented the DVD, it might have been called Live, Die, Repeat. It wasn't marketed well.
Yeah, it's one of those weird movies where it kind of came in under the radar.
Yeah.
And then it developed like a cult following.
Yeah.
Most people think that it's a really good movie, and it got good word of mouth after it came out on home video, and there was a lot of talk of sequel, and then I feel like it's kind of faded away again a bit.
Yeah, I think there was heavy talk of sequel when the last batch of Mission Impossibles was in pre-production, but then COVID sort of mangled the production schedule for those movies, and then knocked the very, very early pre-production for Edge of Tomorrow 2 out of the schedule, and both Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt only got more famous, if that's possible. So, that their availability for these sorts of things are probably less and less these days. So who knows if we'll ever see it. But I think as of this recording, that the like a high def or an HDR Blu-ray version of Edge of Tomorrow was just recently released. I have yet to get my hands on it, but it's probably one of those things I should do since I am talking about the movie quite a bit. So.
Sure. And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightsitesandmovienights.com. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that to discuss episodes as they come out, as well as any other discussion about time loop movies, TV shows, novels, anything time loop related is welcome there. And so, until next time.
Soy Hector 3.
Hector 2.
Hector 1. Soy Hector 3.
Hector 2.
Hector 1. Soy Hector 3.
Hector 2.
Hector 1. Soy Hector 3.